What is up, guys? It's Flash back with some more charts, another video. It's Friday, November 7, about 5 p.m. Eastern. Decided to crack a cold one here, get into the charts, and just share with you guys my thoughts, my perspective on Bitcoin, on MSTR, on Tesla. Let you guys know what I'm thinking, and really for myself, to give myself clarity, and I hope I can give you guys some clarity as well. So let's just kind of get into it, right? So here's Bitcoin on the weekly, on the linear scale with the power law indicator overlaid in the background. Again, thank you to Leo Hart who implemented this power law indicator, right? The power law is this core green line. You have some bubbles that can go up to the top of the orange and the red. You have some bear markets that can go and touch the purple and blue. Right now we're somewhere in between, right? But the linear scale, I think, does a really good job of putting into your brain, into your mind, the gravity of what Bitcoin is doing, right? A sound, hard asset in a fiat world, right? So even if we are in a bear market and we do kind of come down to touch these lower bands here, I mean, that is the opportunity of a lifetime, in my opinion, right? So with that, whether these charts are accurate or not, or whether we're in a bear market or still in a bull market or not, like, this chart alone gives me the confidence and the conviction to say, hey, I'm going to keep buying here because this thing is going to go vertical, especially on a linear scale, right? I also wanted to overlay MSTR in the blue, right? So this is MSTR, more volatile than Bitcoin, right? We've had some crazy downside action, some crazy swings, but all in all, guys, when this is said and done, when it is 2030 or 2035, like, I'm gonna look back on this video myself and I'm gonna be like, wow, that was some crazy price action that we were seeing, but I think we're gonna be a lot higher at that time, right? So I've made the mistake in the past, in 2020 or 2015 of getting shaken out, and then today it's like, why didn't I just back up the truck, load up the boat, and buy as much as I could and ignore the violent swings, right? This is something you kind of just set and forget and you don't look at it. But of course, we like to look at it on a daily basis, right? Especially me, I'm curious. I love to track this stuff, but ultimately it's time to go out and touch some grass. Okay, so let's just keep working our way through here. So this is Bitcoin again on the weekly. And as you can see here, like, we did a similar consolidation, upwards accumulation almost in 2016, 2017. We kind of had a mini version of that in 2020. And now I think, we just have a much bigger version of that going on right now. That's really, truly my perspective. And when we think about that, like, we could have a move like this in front of us, right? I don't think, $1 million or $2 million, that's kind of, that's out there. That's quite the target. But I'm just kind of overlaying 2017 and just trying to compare and contrast. And, again, I'm not saying we're going to get this move, but I think we could potentially get a version of this move, right? So whether it's to 300, 400, 500, 600K even, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, right? So again, this is all about perspective and ignoring kind of the news and the narratives, right? And just kind of letting the market do the work. Because when we think about the ISM, and again, thanks to Raoul Pal and Julian Battelle from Real Vision, like, I do think that this is tracking the ISM, right? So the ISM, really the business cycle, right? So it ebbs and flows. The Federal Reserve, the government, there's debt involved. They have to refinance the debt, blah, 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 right? But when we think about it, like, we've kind of just been flatlining, or we're kind of just going sideways here. The Bitcoin implied ISM pricing with the ISM in the black line. We just got a data release. I think it was on Monday, November 3rd. The ISM, the survey, came in just at 48 or 49, so it didn't quite break 50 yet, which is what we're looking to do. But I think once we break 50, that's when this market, I think, is going to wake up. The business cycle is going to wake up, and we could see some continued upside, right? So when we think about that and we think about Bitcoin, we've kind of just been in this channel, right? If we go back to this chart, we kind of just put a little channel here. I think we're just kind of in an upwards accumulation. We're kind of just, we're on the runway getting ready to take off even higher, right? So that's kind of, if you tilt your head, like, it's kind of just the ISM. Again, we kind of got some flat data here on November 3rd. I think it was 49 something. So, we may see a little dip here, which is what we're seeing, right? But December 3rd, I think, is when the next data comes out, give or take a couple days. Ultimately, I think Real Vision's leading indicators and liquidity indicators are pointing to a rise in the business cycle, right? For a variety of reasons. But that's when I think, come December, we could see some continued upside, right? And I'll show you that in the chart here. So I want to just review previous Bitcoin consolidations in this bull run, right? So this is the start of 2023 through 2024. You kind of had this rounded dome, rounded top, and then you found yourself in this range on the top side of this dome, right? And we kind of consolidated, and eventually broke out of the dome and broke out of the range, okay? Let's move on to the next one here. So this is 2024 through 2025. Again, you kind of had somewhat of a dome here. There's definitely a curvature to some price action here. You had this range that you were in, and you actually broke down out of this range and you created a second range, right? And we came down and touched the bottom of this range, right, at around 50K. What a buying opportunity that was, right? You kind of had some ABC price action where it made a lower low here. We shook out a lot of the weak hands, still further consolidation, and eventually we broke out of the dome, broke out of the range, and continued higher, right? So let's move on. So this is April of this year. You guys all remember the tariff scare, the tariff low, but you had this domed price action, right? You had a range up here that we are kind of distributing in, ultimately. Broke out of that range and kind of created a mini new range down here. We almost touched the bottom of it, right at like 72, 73K, right? You also had this resistance line in orange. And so let's just look at where we're at today, okay? So you have some domed price action, some curvature to this price action. There's a couple different domes here. I know there's a lot going on this chart, right? But we have this range here, which we're in. And so my expectation is for us to either break out of this yellow dome and blue dome and continue higher, or we have a little bit more downside to go, right? Where we kind of come down into this new range below us, and you have this 86K level, which is the midpoint of this new range. Again, it's just a copy and paste of the range above. And the bottom part of that range is around 76.8K. And I would say to myself, what a great buying opportunity that is if we were to get it, right? And so once I've kind of realized, hey, we may have more downside to go, the price action just becomes a lot clearer. Like, I think this is a bear flag breaking down. I think we may be in another bear flag that's going to ultimately break down. Time will tell. Who's to say? But I also want to talk about David F. at Trading Hearst. He's been able to detect these cycles in Bitcoin. So you have this like a metronome, a heartbeat, a rhythm to the market, right? And so you have this 30-day cycle in gray, you have an 80-day cycle in green, and then you have a much bigger 80-day cycle. I think it's around 250 days or so, right? So during this bull market, at least, this price action has had a rhythm to it, so to speak, right? And so if we extrapolate that out, we have some continued downside ahead of us according to these cycles. And I have been tracking this for a little bit, and I've kind of realized, do not fade these cycles, right? I like to think, hey, price action may ignore these cycles ultimately because I've been a perma bull, right? I think that's kind of been my downfall. And so if we just bring in the daily consolidation that we're in and we overlay the cycles, again, if we look back at the tariff low, we kind of bottomed out at the bottom of this 80-day cycle, the bottom of the 200-day cycle. It was generally in this area at the bottom of this second range. So that's why I'm like, hey, we may come down in this 80-day cycle. We still have a lot more to go. Bottoming area could be around, what do you know, December 3rd, 2025, right when this next ISM report should be coming out, right? And so if that ISM report is 50 or above, I think then it's game on, right? And we could be down here at 86 or 76. But in my opinion, this is a great, fantastic buying opportunity. This is a gift. We just may have to wait it out a little bit further. And that's only a month away, less than a month away right now, right? So that's my 2 cents for where we're at. Again, December 3rd, maybe it's mid-December, later December. It doesn't really matter because ultimately I think we're going much higher. And this new 200-day cycle has us coming out into April or May of 2026 in terms of the next peak, right? So I think when we think about this bull market, let's take into consideration the rhythmic aspect of it. And the market's going to do what the market's going to do. It's going to shake people out. It's going to give people FOMO. And I don't know, I've never had a more clear picture in my head in terms of what price action is doing than these charts. So let's look at MSTR. Now, no doubt about it, this has been so painful for a lot of people, right? Especially people that kind of got in up here. But we kind of round tripped in this dome, in this arc, right? Similar story back here. We kind of made it a round trip and shook a lot of people out, right? And so I still kind of am thinking, what if MSTR is kind of leading Bitcoin, right? MSTR has really come around to this dome. Maybe this is a bottom. Maybe we have some continuation. Who's to say? But when we bring back this, like MSTR is all the way already down here. And, we're going to see if MSTR is maybe leading Bitcoin. That's kind of my thesis right now, but, just kind of speculation. Ultimately, we still have a lot of work to do, right? We still want to get above this domed resistance, this orange resistance, and, we're all looking for that next run. And I still think 2026 is going to be a great year for us. So I'm holding steady, guys. I'm holding strong. It hasn't been easy. There's been a lot of frustration, a lot of noise on Twitter and on X, but I'm hoping this is helpful at least. And then when we think about MSTR Bitcoin, MSTR measured in Bitcoin on the monthly time frame, right? You've probably seen this from other folks. I was talking with Koosh a little bit. This looks like a macro reaccumulation or an accumulation, a Wyckoff accumulation, right? So we're at the top end of this range on the monthly, and we're kind of in this sign of strength region, this SOS, where we have this A, B, C correction. Obviously, we want this 30-month moving average to hold. There's still a lot of there's 20 days left in this month, so this could still be a wick. If we zoom in a little bit onto the weekly, MSTR measured in Bitcoin, there is there are some connection points here, right? So this could be a capitulation bottom. This is shaded green because in my eyes, this is the time to be accumulating MSTR if you want to outperform Bitcoin. It probably wasn't up here in hindsight in the red shaded area. This is probably where you want to rotate back into Bitcoin, for example. So we're going to see if this plays out, right? But this is just speculation, but I think it's relatively clean. It provides me some clarity about where we're at, where we can go. And then ultimately, one last little treat for you guys is Tesla. So Tesla on the daily, at David Hurst, there's a 160-day cycle to Tesla. And I do think Tesla kind of is very correlated with general market sentiment in general, like the S&P 500, the NASDAQ. And so, when we really consider these cycles and we maybe don't fade these cycles, this looks like a double top, a rounded top here, and, looks like we could break down for Tesla. So, I have a put on for Tesla, out in February, right? So I'm expecting some more downside, and then, ultimately I think we'll go long Tesla, because of the nature of the market, the nature of the cycles, right? So guys, I hope that's helpful. A lot going on, a lot to keep track of, but again, this is kind of where my head's at. I think we have some continued downside, and then I think we're going to be on our way to 300K plus into 2026. So drop me a like if you guys found this helpful. I will see you all in the next one.